The summer air in Memphis carried a familiar electricity that only an Elvis Presley concert could create. It was the evening of July 1976, and long before the doors of the Mid-South Coliseum opened, thousands of fans had already gathered outside. Some had driven across several states just for one chance to see the King perform. Others had waited in line since sunrise, clutching vinyl records, faded concert programs, and homemade signs that simply read, "We love you, Elvis." Inside the arena, technicians rushed across the stage, checking microphones, adjusting amplifiers, and tuning guitars. Bright white spotlights swept across thousands of empty seats that would soon become a sea of cheering faces. Backstage, however, the atmosphere felt strangely quiet. Elvis Presley sat alone in his dressing room. He wasn't looking into the mirror. He wasn't rehearsing lyrics. Instead, he stared silently at an old acoustic guitar resting against the wall. His longtime friend and tour manager, Joe Esposito, knocked gently before stepping inside. "You ready, EP?" Elvis smiled faintly. "I guess I am." Joe noticed something unusual. Normally, before every show, Elvis joked with the musicians or practiced vocal warm-ups. Tonight, he looked thoughtful, almost distant. "You all right?" Joe asked. Elvis leaned back. "You ever wonder why people come to these shows?" Joe laughed. "To see the greatest entertainer alive." Elvis shook his head. "No, they come because they need something." Joe frowned. "What do you mean?" Elvis looked toward the dressing room door, where thousands of voices echoed faintly through the concrete walls. "They don't just come for music. They come carrying things nobody else can see." Joe stayed quiet. Elvis continued, "Some come because they're lonely. Some because they're grieving. Some because they need hope for just a couple of hours." He paused. "And if I can't give them that, then I'm just another man with a microphone." Joe had worked beside Elvis for years. He had seen sold-out arenas, standing ovations, movie premieres, private jets. But moments like this reminded him why so many people loved Elvis beyond his voice. He genuinely cared, maybe too much. A crew member opened the door. "5 minutes, Elvis." He stood slowly, adjusted the famous white belt around his black leather concert suit, ran one hand through his jet-black hair, then smiled. "Let's go make somebody forget their troubles." Outside, 20-year-old Linda Harper carefully pushed a wheelchair through the crowded entrance. Sitting inside was her 12-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily wore a simple white hoodie despite the July heat. Covering her head was a white scarf tied carefully behind her neck. She hadn't had hair in months. The chemotherapy had taken that. But it hadn't taken her smile. Not completely. She hugged something tightly against her chest. An old acoustic guitar. It wasn't valuable. Its wooden finish had faded years ago. One tuning peg had been replaced with a different color. Several scratches covered the body. To anyone else, it looked like a forgotten instrument. To Emily, it was priceless. It had belonged to her grandfather. Before he passed away, he had taught her 3 Elvis songs. Only 3. "Love Me Tender," "Can't Help Falling in Love," and "Peace in the Valley." Whenever treatments became unbearable, Emily played those songs. Not perfectly, but with all her heart. As ushers guided them toward the front row accessibility seating, Linda couldn't stop looking around in disbelief. "I still can't believe someone donated these tickets." Emily smiled softly. "I know." Weeks earlier, an anonymous fan club member had heard about Emily's illness and quietly mailed them 2 front-row tickets with only a short, handwritten message. Every child deserves to see their hero. Linda had cried when she opened the envelope. Emily simply whispered, "I'm really going to meet Elvis." The arena lights dimmed. Instantly, 20,000 people exploded with excitement. The opening notes thundered through the speakers. The band stepped onto the stage. Then came the familiar announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley." The building erupted. People stood on chairs. Women screamed. Flashbulbs lit up the darkness like tiny stars. Then Elvis walked into the spotlight, wearing black leather, confident, smiling, looking every bit the legend people had traveled hundreds of miles to see. He raised one hand. The audience became even louder. "Good evening, Memphis!" The first song hit like lightning. Fans sang every lyric. Couples danced between the aisles. Security guards struggled to keep people from rushing the stage. Elvis laughed between verses. "You folks try to wear me out tonight?" The crowd answered with deafening cheers. Song after song, the energy only grew. "Hound Dog," "All Shook Up," "Jailhouse Rock." Each performance felt bigger than the last. Yet, every few minutes, Elvis found himself glancing toward the front row, toward one small figure, a young girl, white scarf, wheelchair, holding an old guitar. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't screaming. She wasn't waving signs. She simply watched him, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. Each time Elvis looked her way, she lowered her eyes shyly. Something about her stayed with him. He couldn't explain why. Meanwhile, Emily forgot about everything else. For nearly an hour, she wasn't a hospital patient. She wasn't counting treatments. She wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She was simply a little girl watching her hero. She laughed every time Elvis made one of his playful jokes. She clapped until her hands hurt. Even the nurses who usually accompanied her to appointments had never seen her look so alive. Linda quietly watched her daughter, trying not to cry. The doctors had warned her not to expect miracles. Emily's illness was aggressive. The treatments were exhausting. No one knew how much time remained. But tonight, for the first time in months, Emily looked like herself again. That alone made every difficult day worth it. As the concert continued, Elvis reached for a towel handed to him by Charlie Hodge. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, then looked toward the front again. The girl was still there, still holding that guitar, not asking for attention, not trying to get on stage, just watching him with quiet admiration. Elvis leaned toward Charlie. "You see that little girl?" Charlie nodded. "The one with the guitar?" "Yeah, I noticed her earlier." Elvis watched another few seconds. "Something tells me she's carrying more than that guitar." Charlie followed his gaze. "I think you're right." The band prepared for the next number. A gentle introduction echoed through the arena. Elvis stepped closer to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to slow things down for a little while." The audience applauded. Everyone recognized the opening chords immediately. "Love Me Tender." Thousands of couples reached for each other's hands. Lighters began glowing across the darkened arena. Elvis sang the opening line, "Love Me Tender." His voice floated gently through the building. The audience fell silent. Halfway through the first verse, his eyes met Emily's. For the first time, she wasn't smiling. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She held her grandfather's guitar so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because this moment had become everything she had dreamed of during endless nights in hospital rooms. Elvis stopped singing for the briefest second, barely noticeable, but enough for Charlie Hodge to glance toward him with concern. Elvis kept singing, yet something inside him had changed. The words suddenly felt different, more personal, more urgent. As the song neared its final chorus, he realized he could no longer ignore the feeling pulling at his heart. He looked at the audience, then back at the young girl. A decision was forming in his mind, one that no one, not the band, not his manager, not the audience, could have predicted. And within moments, 20,000 people would witness a scene that would be remembered far longer than any song performed that night. The final words of "Love Me Tender" lingered softly through the Mid-South Coliseum. For a brief moment, everything felt exactly as it always had during an Elvis Presley concert. Thousands of fans swayed beneath the glow of hundreds of tiny lights. The band waited for the next cue. Charlie Hodge stood only a few feet away, ready to hand Elvis another guitar or a scarf if needed. But then, something unusual happened. Elvis didn't signal for the next song. He didn't smile at the audience. He didn't step back toward center stage. Instead, he lowered the microphone from his lips and simply stared toward the front row. Silence slowly spread across the arena. The musicians looked at one another in confusion. Ronnie Tutt's drumsticks hovered in the air. James Burton kept his fingers resting lightly on his guitar strings. No one moved. No one spoke. 20,000 people instinctively sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. Elvis took one slow breath, then another. Without saying a single word, he gently placed the microphone on its stand. Charlie frowned. This wasn't in the set list. This wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even discussed backstage. Elvis stepped away from the spotlight. 1, 2, 3 steps. Then he walked directly toward the edge of the stage. The audience erupted into cheers, assuming he was simply greeting fans. Security guards immediately moved closer. Whenever Elvis approached the front of the stage, excited fans often rushed forward hoping for a handshake or a scarf. But tonight, he wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at only one person. Emily, the little girl in the wheelchair. Emily's heart nearly stopped. She watched Elvis getting closer, closer, closer. Her breathing became uneven. "No," she whispered. "He can't be coming here." Linda squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "I don't think this is real." Neither of them had expected anything beyond watching the concert. Meeting Elvis? That belonged only in dreams. The security team noticed Elvis continuing toward the stairs leading off stage. One guard hurried over. "Mr. Presley." Elvis smiled politely. "I'm all right." The guard hesitated. "But sir." Elvis gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just give me a minute." There was something in Elvis's voice that ended the conversation immediately. The guard stepped aside, for perhaps the first time that evening. The loudest building in Memphis became almost completely silent. Reporters seated near the sound booth quickly grabbed their cameras. Flashbulbs began popping again. Nobody knew what was happening. Some believed Elvis had become ill. Others thought a fan needed medical attention. Even the band remained frozen. Charlie leaned toward Joe Esposito. "What's he doing?" Joe quietly answered. "I honestly don't know." And that was the truth. Even the people closest to Elvis had no idea what was about to unfold. Elvis slowly climbed down from the stage. Instead of standing over Emily, he immediately lowered himself onto one knee, so they were at the same eye level. That simple gesture changed everything. He wasn't looking down at a sick child. He was speaking to another human being. Emily couldn't say a word. She stared into the eyes she had only ever seen on album covers and television. Elvis smiled warmly. "Well now, I've been seeing you all night." Emily blinked. You saw me?" "I sure did." He pointed gently toward the old guitar resting across her lap. "And I've been wondering about that guitar." Emily looked down. It's my grandpa's." Elvis carefully reached toward it. "Mind if I take a closer look?" With trembling hands, she nodded. He lifted the guitar as though it were something priceless. He noticed every scratch, every worn edge, the faded wood, the mismatched tuning peg. This wasn't a collector's instrument. It was something much more valuable. It had been loved. Elvis smiled. "This guitar's got stories." Emily laughed softly through her tears. "It does." Linda quietly wiped her eyes. She had imagined countless versions of this night. Perhaps Elvis would wave, perhaps he'd smile in Emily's direction. Never, not even once, had she imagined him kneeling beside her daughter as though there were no audience at all. Elvis looked toward Linda. "You're her mother?" "Yes." "I'm Linda." He extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you." She shook it with trembling fingers. "Thank you for coming over." Elvis answered without hesitation, "No." "Thank you for bringing her." Those words hit Linda harder than anything else. For months, doctors, hospitals, insurance forms, specialists, every conversation had centered around illness. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't talking about Emily's disease. They were simply talking about Emily. Elvis turned back toward the little girl. "So, can you play?" Emily smiled shyly. "A little. What's your favorite song?" She didn't even have to think. "Love Me Tender." Elvis grinned. "I figured." The crowd laughed gently. It broke the tension just enough. Then Elvis noticed the tears still rolling down her cheeks. He spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated. She didn't want to ruin the evening, but something about Elvis made honesty feel safe. "I didn't think—" She stopped. Elvis waited patiently. "I didn't think I'd live long enough to see you." The words hung in the air like heavy rain clouds. Nearby fans lowered their heads. Several security guards quietly looked away. Charlie Hodge closed his eyes for a moment. Even the photographers stopped taking pictures. Linda covered her mouth, trying not to sob. Emily immediately regretted saying it. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" Before she could finish, Elvis gently reached over and held her hand. "You don't ever have to apologize for telling the truth." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The arena remained unbelievably quiet. 20,000 people, not one cheer, not one shout, only silence. Elvis looked at the little girl's fragile fingers wrapped around his own. Then he looked toward the enormous audience. He slowly stood. Everyone assumed he was about to return to the stage. Instead, he picked up the microphone again. Not from center stage, but while standing beside Emily. His voice echoed through the Coliseum. "You know, when I walked out here tonight, I thought I came to give y'all a concert." A few people smiled. "But I think the Lord had another plan." The audience listened without making a sound. Elvis continued. "Sometimes we get so busy making noise, that we forget to notice the people who are fighting battles we can't see. His eyes drifted back toward Emily. This young lady, she reminded me what's really important. A wave of emotion spread through the arena. Many people openly cried. Others quietly held each other's hands. Elvis looked toward the band. James Burton watched carefully. Charlie waited. Joe watched from backstage. Then Elvis spoke the words that surprised everyone. "I'm changing tonight's program." The musicians exchanged puzzled glances. No rehearsal, no arrangement, no warning. Elvis smiled. "I think we're going to have ourselves a different kind of evening." The audience erupted into applause, but nobody, not even the band, had any idea what Elvis intended to do next. What happened over the following few minutes would become the most unforgettable moment of the entire night, and it had nothing to do with chart-topping hits or standing ovations. It began with one old guitar, and a promise Elvis was about to make to a little girl that would change both of their lives forever. The applause rolled through the Mid-South Coliseum like distant thunder. No one had expected Elvis Presley to rewrite the evening in front of 20,000 people. Even the members of the TCB band exchanged uncertain smiles. They had followed Elvis through hundreds of performances. He often changed the order of songs. He joked with the audience. Sometimes he repeated a chorus if the crowd demanded it. But this was different. He had completely abandoned the concert, not because something had gone wrong, because someone mattered more. Elvis looked down at Emily's old guitar. He gently ran his fingers across the scratched wood. "You know," he said with a smile, "I think this guitar's lived a longer life than some of mine." The audience laughed softly. Emily giggled through her tears. "It squeaks sometimes." "Does it?" "Oh, yes." "It even goes out of tune," Elvis grinned. "Well, so do I." The crowd burst into laughter again. For the first time that night, Emily laughed without thinking about hospitals, without thinking about medicine, without thinking about tomorrow. She was simply a 12-year-old girl talking to her hero. Elvis examined the guitar more carefully. His expression changed. "This wasn't bought in a fancy music store, was it?" Emily slowly shook her head. "It belonged to Grandpa. He taught me." "What did he teach you?" "Only 3 songs." Elvis nodded. "Sometimes 3 songs are enough." She smiled. "He said if I learned those 3, I'd always have hope." Elvis became very quiet. Hope. That single word echoed inside him. Over the years he had met politicians, actors, world-famous athletes, presidents, yet the people he remembered most were ordinary people holding on to hope with everything they had. He handed the microphone to Charlie Hodge. "Hold this for me." Charlie took it. "What are you thinking, EP?" Elvis answered with a wink. "I'm thinking we don't need electricity for the next song." He looked toward James Burton. "James, I need you to sit this one out." James laughed. "Never thought I'd hear you say that." Elvis smiled. "Tonight, it's just me." The audience instantly understood. This wasn't going to be another performance. It was going to be a conversation through music. Elvis slowly adjusted the tuning pegs on Emily's guitar. He strummed one chord, then another. The instrument sounded old. Its tone wasn't perfect. A few strings buzzed slightly. Most performers would have asked for a better guitar. Elvis simply smiled. "This one's got soul." Emily's eyes grew wider. "You're really going to play it?" "If you'll let me." She nodded so quickly her white scarf slipped slightly over one shoulder. "I'd love that." He pulled a nearby chair closer instead of standing, another unusual choice. There would be no dramatic spotlight, no grand stage entrance, just Elvis, a chair, a little girl's guitar, and 20,000 silent witnesses. He rested the guitar across his knee, then looked directly at Emily. "I've been singing this song for a long time," she whispered. "I know. But tonight, I'm singing it a little differently." Without any introduction, without any orchestra, without drums, without backup singers, Elvis softly began playing "Love Me Tender." The first chord floated across the arena. It wasn't loud. People leaned forward just to hear it. The silence inside the Colosseum became almost sacred. Elvis's voice carried a tenderness rarely heard during his large arena shows. He wasn't singing to entertain. He was singing to comfort. Every word seemed meant for one listener. "Love me tender." Emily closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks again. But these tears felt different, not filled with fear, filled with peace. Linda quietly placed a hand over her daughter's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. There were no words capable of describing what they were living. By the second verse, something remarkable happened. People throughout the arena stopped holding up cameras. Many lowered them completely. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Instead, couples held hands. Parents hugged their children. Veterans quietly wiped their eyes. Even several security guards stood perfectly still. Years later, many fans would remember this as the quietest Elvis concert they had ever attended. As the final note faded away, no applause came. Not because people disliked it, because nobody wanted to break the silence. Elvis gently returned the guitar to Emily. "Take good care of it," she smiled. "I always will." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you do something for me?" Emily looked surprised. "For you?" "Yeah. If someday you get stronger, promise you'll teach somebody else those same 3 songs." Emily blinked. "What if—" She swallowed hard. "What if I don't get stronger?" The question struck everyone like a lightning bolt. Linda quietly looked toward the floor. Charlie Hodge removed his glasses. Even Joe Esposito felt his chest tighten. Elvis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gently took Emily's hands into his own. Then he spoke words that no one in the building would ever forget. "You listen to me. You don't measure life by how many years you get. You measure it by how much love you leave behind." He pointed toward the thousands of people surrounding them. "Look around." Emily slowly turned her head. Every face was looking back at her, smiling, praying, crying. "You've already filled this room with more courage than most people spend a lifetime finding." Emily's tears flowed freely. "I have? You sure have. And don't let anybody convince you otherwise." A standing ovation suddenly erupted, not for Elvis, for Emily. 20,000 people rose to their feet. The applause echoed through every corner of the arena. Emily covered her face. "I've never had people clap for me." Elvis smiled warmly. "They're not clapping because they feel sorry for you. They're clapping because you reminded all of us what real courage looks like." The ovation continued for nearly 2 full minutes. Some fans shouted, "We love you, Emily!" Others simply kept applauding. Linda could no longer hold back her tears. She had spent months watching strangers avoid looking at her daughter's wheelchair. Tonight, thousands of strangers were celebrating her. As the applause slowly faded, Elvis quietly slipped his right hand into his jacket pocket. Inside was something he almost never removed, his famous TCB ring. The lightning bolt symbol represented taking care of business. It wasn't just jewelry. It represented loyalty, responsibility, looking after people. Many members of Elvis's inner circle treasured theirs. Elvis slowly removed his own ring. Charlie immediately noticed. His eyes widened. He stepped closer. E.P., he whispered. You sure? Elvis simply nodded, without another word. He gently placed the ring into Emily's trembling hand. She stared at it in disbelief. I can't. It's yours now. Her eyes grew even wider. But everybody knows this ring, Elvis smiled. That's exactly why I want you to have it. Linda gasped. Mr. Presley, it's far too valuable. Elvis softly shook his head. No, the valuable thing isn't the ring. He looked directly at Emily. The valuable thing is remembering what it stands for. He gently closed her fingers around it. It means, take care of people whenever you can, even when nobody's watching. Emily clutched the ring tightly against her heart. I'll never forget. Elvis smiled. I believe you. The audience erupted into another emotional standing ovation. But unknown to everyone in the Coliseum, the greatest surprise of the entire night had not happened yet. After the concert ended, Elvis would quietly leave the arena. Not for his hotel, not for a celebration, and not for the waiting reporters. Instead, he would ask his driver to take him somewhere no one expected, a place where the spotlight could never reach, but where one final act of kindness would become the true ending of this unforgettable night. The final encore ended beneath a shower of applause. Thousands of fans remained standing long after the music stopped, hoping Elvis would return for one more song. Instead, the house lights slowly brightened. The audience began making their way toward the exits, still talking about what they had just witnessed. Some couldn't stop discussing the acoustic performance. Others spoke about the little girl in the wheelchair. Many simply shook their heads in disbelief. I've been to 12 Elvis concerts, one elderly man told his wife. I've never seen anything like tonight. Nearby, a young woman wiped tears from her face. It didn't feel like a concert. It felt like we all witnessed something sacred. Backstage, however, there was no celebration. The musicians placed their instruments into their cases. Crew members began disconnecting cables and rolling equipment toward waiting trucks. Normally, Elvis would joke with the band after a successful show. Tonight, he quietly removed his leather jacket and sat alone for several moments. Charlie Hodge finally walked in. That little girl. Elvis nodded before Charlie could finish. I can't stop thinking about her. Joe Esposito entered carrying a towel. The car's ready whenever you are. Elvis stood. No. Joe looked confused. What do you mean? We're making one more stop. Where? Elvis looked toward Linda and Emily, who were speaking with arena staff nearby. I want to know where she's staying. A few minutes later, Linda and Emily were preparing to leave when Joe Esposito approached them. Mrs. Harper? Linda turned. Yes. Mr. Presley was wondering, he smiled, if it wouldn't be too much trouble. Would you mind telling us which hospital Emily is receiving treatment at? Linda stared silently. You mean, he wants to know? Joe nodded. He does. Emily's eyes widened. But the concert's over. Joe smiled warmly. Apparently, Mr. Presley doesn't think the evening is. Nearly an hour later, most of Memphis had settled into the quiet rhythm of a summer night. Street lights reflected off the pavement, as Elvis's Cadillac slowly pulled into the parking lot of Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. There were no reporters, no photographers, no television cameras. Only one security guard at the entrance, who looked up in complete surprise. At first, he thought he was imagining things. Then Elvis stepped out of the car carrying nothing except a small brown paper bag. The guard hurried toward him. "Mr. Presley, we weren't expecting—" "I know," Elvis smiled gently. "I didn't come for publicity. I came to visit a friend." Inside the hospital, the evening shift was unusually quiet. Nurses moved softly through dimly lit hallways. Some children were asleep, others watched television from their beds. A few parents sat beside windows, praying tomorrow might bring better news than today. When the receptionist realized who had walked through the doors, she nearly dropped the clipboard she was holding. "Mr. Presley," he raised one finger to his lips. "Could we keep this between us?" She nodded immediately. "Of course." Emily had already been admitted back into her room after becoming exhausted from the excitement of the concert. The nurses expected she would sleep through the night. Instead, there was a gentle knock on her hospital door. Linda looked up. "Come in." The door slowly opened. Standing there, still wearing the same black concert clothes, was Elvis Presley. Emily blinked once, twice. She rubbed her eyes. "I must be dreaming," Elvis chuckled. "I was hoping you'd still be awake." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Emily laughed, the happiest laugh anyone in that room had heard in months. Elvis pulled a chair beside her bed. "You know, I realized something after the concert." Emily tilted her head. "What?" "I never got to hear you play," she smiled nervously. "I'm not very good." He laughed softly. "Neither was I when I started." She looked at the guitar resting beside her bed. "The nurses brought it with us. Would you play one song?" Emily looked uncertain. "What if I mess up?" Elvis leaned forward. "Then we'll both mess up together." With shaking hands, Emily picked up her grandfather's guitar. Her fingers trembled from weakness. The room remained completely silent. She slowly began playing "Peace in the Valley." The chords weren't perfect. She accidentally muted one string. She missed another note. Immediately, she stopped. "I'm sorry." Elvis gently shook his head. "No." "Start again." She looked embarrassed. "I missed it." He smiled. "You know something? My mama used to tell me, the heart hears things the ears never can." Emily smiled. Then she started again. This time, she finished the entire song. By the final chord, every nurse standing in the hallway had tears in their eyes. Linda quietly cried into a handkerchief. Even Joe Esposito, standing outside the room, looked away to compose himself. When the music ended, Elvis applauded, not politely, genuinely. "Now that's beautiful." Emily laughed. "I don't think so." "I do." He pointed toward the guitar. "Your grandpa would be proud." Emily whispered, "I hope so." "I know so." Elvis reached for the small brown paper bag he had carried into the hospital. Inside was a neatly folded black leather guitar strap embroidered with the letters T.C.B. He placed it beside Emily's guitar. "I thought your grandpa's guitar deserved something special." She stared at it in amazement. "You brought this for me?" "I did." She carefully touched the leather as though it might disappear. "I'll use it every time I play." "I hope you do." Before leaving, Elvis quietly asked Linda if they could speak outside for a moment. The hallway was empty, except for a single nurse making notes at the station. Linda looked concerned. Is everything all right? Elvis reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a sealed envelope. I'd appreciate it if you waited until I was gone before opening it. She frowned. I can't accept money. He smiled kindly. I didn't ask you to. Then he gently closed her hand around the envelope. It's just one parent trying to help another. Linda felt tears filling her eyes again. I don't know how to thank you. Elvis answered with the same quiet sincerity that had defined the entire evening. If you really want to thank me, keep believing in her. He looked back through the hospital room window, where Emily was smiling as she adjusted the new guitar strap. She's stronger than she knows. Only after Elvis's car disappeared into the Memphis night did Linda open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, No family should spend precious time worrying about bills when they should be making memories. Please let this lighten the road ahead. God bless you both, Elvis. Beneath the note was a cashier's check large enough to cover months of Emily's medical expenses. Linda could no longer stand. She sat down in the hallway and wept. Not because of the money, but because someone the whole world called the king had treated her daughter like the most important person in Memphis. Years passed. Emily kept every promise she had made that night. Whenever her health allowed, she visited children's hospitals with her grandfather's guitar. She played the same 3 songs he had taught her. She encouraged frightened children before surgeries. She sang for families waiting through long nights. Around her neck, she always wore the famous TCB ring on a small silver chain. Whenever someone asked what it meant, she smiled and answered exactly as Elvis had told her. It means taking care of people, even when nobody's watching. Elvis Presley performed hundreds of concerts throughout his extraordinary career. Audiences remembered the powerful voice, the dazzling stage presence, the unforgettable hits. But for those who were inside the Mid-South Coliseum that summer evening in 1976, none of those memories shined brighter than the moment the music stopped, because they learned that night that the greatest performance Elvis Presley ever gave wasn't measured by applause, record sales, or standing ovations. It was measured by the quiet footsteps of a man who walked away from the spotlight, so that one frightened little girl could believe, if only for one unforgettable night, that she was never alone.